At any age, a man may feel jealousy, especially if he cares deeply. But maturity often means he tries to hide it. Not because he's manipulative, but because he fears seeming insecure or losing the dignity he's worked a lifetime to build. Sometimes what a man doesn't say speaks loudest of all. Jealousy isn't always loud. It can be quiet, careful, and even a little heartbreaking. I've seen it in coffee shops, at family gatherings, in the gentle way a man's smile falters when another name comes up in conversation. I'm Vernon. Today I'll reveal 4 signs a man is jealous but is trying not to show it, and why noticing these signs can deepen your understanding of his heart and your own. They're invitations to see the vulnerable human being behind the composed exterior. Before we dive deep into these emotional currents, would you do me a favor? Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of women who believe that understanding leads to deeper connection, not control. You might not think much of it at first, but this small change in behavior can say more than words ever could.
Number 1. He gets unusually quiet or withdrawn around certain people. You know that saying by the great Carl Jung, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Well, sometimes what makes a man go quiet reveals more about his heart than any words could. Imagine this. You're having a lovely conversation, laughing, sharing stories. Then you mention your lunch with David from book club, or how helpful the young man at the hardware store was, and suddenly, silence. Not angry silence, but a careful, measured quiet. He might nod politely, change the subject, or suddenly become very interested in his phone. This withdrawal isn't about rudeness. It's about emotional self-preservation. When a man feels that uncomfortable twist in his chest, that mix of fear and longing we call jealousy, his instinct is often to retreat rather than reveal. He's thinking, "I won't let her see how much this bothers me." It's his way of protecting both his pride and what he perceives as the stability of the relationship. Men of our generation were often taught that emotional vulnerability equals weakness. So when jealousy strikes, that primal fear of losing someone precious, the mature man's response is often to withdraw until he can regain his composure. He's not punishing you. He's protecting himself and, in his mind, protecting you from his insecurity. This silence can be particularly pronounced when the other person represents something he feels he lacks. If you're excited about your book club leader's intellectual discussions and he never finished college, his withdrawal isn't about the man. It's about his own perceived inadequacy. If you mention how funny your yoga instructor is, and he's always worried he's too serious, that quiet moment is him wrestling with self-doubt.
Eleanor was a vibrant 64-year-old who'd been dating Robert for 8 months. Every time she mentioned her yoga instructor, James, Robert would go quiet. Not angry, not sulking, just absent. She noticed he'd suddenly remember something he needed to do, or he'd start talking about the weather. It took her weeks to realize that her enthusiasm about James's teaching style was triggering something deeper in Robert. Not suspicion of infidelity, but a quiet fear that maybe she found more joy and energy in James's company than his own. Robert's withdrawal wasn't jealousy of romance. It was jealousy of the spark she seemed to find elsewhere. What makes this sign particularly heartbreaking is its gentleness. A man who goes quiet isn't trying to control or manipulate. He's trying to disappear his own discomfort. He hopes that by not engaging with the topic, the feeling will pass and normalcy will return. Unfortunately, this often creates the opposite effect, making the silence feel like disapproval or disinterest. The key to recognizing this pattern is consistency. Once or twice might be coincidence, but if he regularly becomes withdrawn when certain names or activities come up, you're witnessing his heart trying to protect itself. The tragedy is that his silence often creates the very distance he's afraid of, because you might interpret his withdrawal as lack of interest in your life. Understanding this sign requires tremendous compassion. When you see it, you're seeing a man who cares so much that the thought of you finding happiness elsewhere feels like a small death. His silence isn't indifference. It's the sound of someone loving you so much that losing you feels unbearable. But withdrawal isn't the only sign. Sometimes jealousy tries to hide behind humor. Number 2. Playful teasing turns a little sharp. Humor can be a beautiful bridge between hearts, but it can also become a hiding place for feelings too tender to speak directly. When a man feels jealous but doesn't want to admit it, jokes become his reconnaissance mission, a way to test waters without diving in. As Maya Angelou wisely observed, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. But with jealous teasing, we need to listen not just to the words, but to the music underneath them. There's a difference between loving playfulness and anxious probing disguised as humor. You'll notice it in the repetition first. He jokes about your favorite waiter not once, but every time you mention going to that restaurant. "Oh, visiting your boyfriend at the coffee shop again," he might say, with a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Or, "I suppose Tom had lots of helpful suggestions," with just enough emphasis on helpful to make you pause and wonder if there's more behind the comment. This kind of teasing serves multiple psychological purposes for him. First, it's a testing ground. He's hoping your reaction will reveal how you truly feel about these other men. Do you laugh it off easily, or do you become defensive? Do you reassure him, or do you seem annoyed by his jokes? Your response gives him information about the threat level he should assign to these relationships. Second, it's a way of expressing his discomfort without having to own it fully. If you call him out on the sharp edge in his humor, he can always retreat behind, "I was just kidding," or "Can't you take a joke?" It gives him plausible deniability while allowing him to voice his concerns indirectly. The psychological mechanism here is fascinating. Men often use humor as a pressure release valve for emotions they don't feel comfortable expressing directly. In our generation especially, admitting to jealousy can feel like admitting to weakness or possessiveness, qualities that don't align with the strong, secure image many men have spent decades building. But there's something else happening too. Sometimes these jokes are his way of marking territory without being overtly possessive. By consistently bringing up these other men in a teasing context, he's subtly reminding both of you that he notices, he's paying attention, and these relationships are on his radar. The sharp edge comes from the internal conflict he's experiencing. Part of him wants to trust completely, and part of him is afraid. Part of him wants to be the cool, secure partner who never feels threatened, and part of him is human enough to feel that uncomfortable twist when another man makes you smile. The humor becomes sharp because it's carrying the weight of all these conflicting emotions. What makes this sign particularly tricky is that it can easily be dismissed or misunderstood. You might think he's just being playful, or you might feel frustrated by what seems like repeated jokes about the same people. The key is to notice when teasing becomes a pattern, especially around specific individuals or situations. Have you ever experienced this kind of sharp-edged teasing from a partner? Comment yes and share what that felt like. Did you sense something deeper underneath the humor? The irony is that this teasing often achieves the opposite of what he hopes. Instead of getting reassurance, he might make you feel like you can't freely share parts of your life without triggering his jokes. Instead of feeling more secure, his indirect approach often leaves both of you feeling less connected and understood. Humor covers many feelings, but jealousy can also show up in unexpected protectiveness. That brings us to the third sign, one that often looks like care, but is driven by fear.
Number 3. He suddenly wants to know all the details. There's something beautiful about a partner who shows genuine interest in your life, and something entirely different about anxious curiosity masquerading as care. When a man starts asking questions he never bothered with before, it might not be growing intimacy, it might be growing insecurity, trying to map the landscape of his fears. The shift is usually subtle but noticeable. Where he once said, "Have a good time, dear," when you went out, now it's, "Where exactly are you meeting? Who else will be there? What time do you think you'll be home?" The questions come wrapped in what appears to be caring attention, but underneath there's an urgency, a need to construct a complete mental picture of your activities, especially the parts that don't include him. This behavior stems from a very human psychological need. When we feel uncertain or threatened, we seek information as a way to regain a sense of control. For a man experiencing jealousy but trying to hide it, gathering details serves multiple purposes. It helps him assess potential threats, gives him talking points to bring up later, and creates a false sense of involvement in situations where he feels excluded. The questions often focus on specific
types of information. Who initiated the plans? Who else will be there? What the group dynamic is usually like? Whether this is a regular occurrence. He's not conducting an interrogation, but his curiosity has a quality of thoroughness that wasn't there before. He wants to understand not just what you're doing, but the emotional context around it. What makes this particularly poignant is that it often happens precisely when a woman is happiest and most socially fulfilled. She's joined a new group, made new friends, or rekindled old interests, things that should be celebrated. But instead of pure celebration, her partner's questions reveal his anxiety about these expanding horizons. Beatrice, a graceful 62-year-old widow, had started dating again after 5 years of focusing solely on her children and grandchildren. Her companion, George, had always been wonderfully respectful of her independence, one of the qualities that drew him to him. Then she joined a local hiking group, something she'd always wanted to do but never had time for during her marriage.
George's reaction surprised her. Suddenly, this man who had never asked more than, "Did you have fun?" wanted to know everything. Which trails they hiked, who organized the routes, how many people typically showed up, whether they socialized after the hikes, who drove whom. His questions came with smiles and genuine seeming interest, but Beatrice sensed something else underneath, a need to know exactly where she stood in relation to everyone else in this new part of her world. The psychology behind this behavior is complex. On one level, he genuinely wants to be part of your happiness, but he also wants to ensure he understands any potential threats to his position in your life. The detailed questions are his way of scanning for warning signs. Is there someone in particular you mention frequently? Do you seem more excited about these activities than about time with him? Are there inside jokes or shared experiences developing that exclude him? What's particularly challenging about this sign is that the questions themselves aren't unreasonable. A caring partner should be interested in your activities and friendships. The difference lies in the intensity, the consistency, and the underlying emotional quality. When the questions feel more like data collection than genuine interest, when they focus heavily on the other people involved, when they come with a subtle sense of urgency, that's when interest crosses into anxious monitoring. This behavior often intensifies if you seem reluctant to provide details, or if you give answers that raise more questions in his mind. If you say the group was really fun, but don't elaborate, he might follow up with increasingly specific questions, trying to fill in the gaps his imagination is painting with increasingly dramatic colors. The poet Rumi once wrote, "Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray." But when we're consumed by jealous anxiety, we lose faith in love's pull and start believing that constant vigilance is the price of keeping someone's heart. The irony is heartbreaking. His need for details often comes from a deep love and fear of loss, but the questioning can create the very distance he's afraid of. When sharing your experiences starts to feel like providing reports, the joy of connection can begin to fade. And sometimes, when a man can't hide jealousy, it slips out in ways you least expect, especially when it shows up dressed as praise. Let's look at the final sign. Number 4. His compliments feel a bit competitive.
Oscar Wilde once said, "I can resist everything except temptation. But I'd add that a jealous man can hide everything except the need to remind you of his worth." When jealousy wears the mask of generosity, it shows up as compliments that carry an undertone of gentle competition. Watch for praise that comes with timing that feels strategic rather than spontaneous. Right after you mention how thoughtful your neighbor was in helping with your garden, he tells you how fortunate you are to have someone who truly understands your needs. When you share how much you enjoyed your book club leader's insights, he suddenly remembers to mention how much your conversations with him have always meant to you. These aren't random compliments. They're soft reassertions of his place in your emotional landscape. The psychology behind competitive compliments is both complex and touching. This is jealousy trying to fight itself with love rather than anger or control. Instead of diminishing the other men in your life or restricting your activities, he's choosing to highlight his own value. It's a remarkably mature approach to an inherently immature emotion. He's betting that reminding you of what you share will matter more than trying to minimize what others offer. You might hear phrases like, "I hope you know how special you are," delivered right after you've talked about someone who made you feel appreciated. Or, "Some women spend their whole lives looking for a man who," followed by a quality he possesses that perhaps the other man doesn't. The compliments themselves are genuine. He truly does see these wonderful things in you and your relationship, but they're deployed with purpose. What makes this sign particularly revealing is its defensive nature. These compliments aren't arising from spontaneous appreciation. They're triggered by perceived threats. He's essentially saying, "Please don't forget what we have," without actually voicing that vulnerable request. It's his way of competing not with aggression or demands, but with reminders of his own devotion and value. The older male doctor's voice was warm, clear, and calm, with a deep timbre and a deliberately slow, thoughtful pace. The competitive element shows up in the specificity of these compliments. If another man is praised for being handy around the house, suddenly he's mentioning how he fixed your leaky faucet last month. If someone else is noted for their sense of humor, he'll reference the time he made you laugh until you cried. He's not inventing these qualities or memories. He's strategically highlighting them as counter-evidence to any appeal others might hold. This behavior often intensifies when he perceives that the other person possesses something he feels insecure about. If you praise another man's cooking and he's always felt inadequate in the kitchen, you might suddenly hear about all the ways he takes care of you that don't involve food. If you mention someone's advanced degree and he left school early for work, he might remind you of his practical wisdom or life experience. There's something both heartbreaking and endearing about this approach. He's not trying to tear down your other connections, he's trying to build up your existing one. It's jealousy wearing the costume of appreciation. Insecurity dressed up as gratitude. In many ways, it's the most emotionally intelligent response to jealousy, acknowledging the feeling by affirming the relationship rather than attacking perceived threats. The timing is everything with this sign. Random compliments throughout your relationship are one thing. Compliments that consistently follow your mentions of other men's positive qualities are something else entirely. It's as if he's carrying an invisible scoreboard, making sure that for every point he perceives another man scoring, he reminds you of several points in his own favor. What makes this particularly poignant is that these compliments reveal his deep awareness of your relationship's strengths. In order to competitively compliment, he has to genuinely recognize and articulate what makes your connection special. So even while revealing his insecurity, he's also demonstrating his appreciation for what you share. If this video is helping you understand these subtle emotional languages, hit that save button so you can return to these insights whenever you need to decode the complex communications of the heart. The challenge with competitive compliments is that they can sometimes feel calculated rather than heartfelt, even when the underlying emotions are completely genuine. When praise feels like it's serving a purpose beyond simple appreciation, it can create a sense that you're being managed rather than loved, even though his intention is exactly the opposite. So if you notice these signs, remember, jealousy is rarely about control. It's often about fear of losing someone precious. If you've made it this far, you now see that jealousy isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides in silence, in humor, in questions or quiet compliments. Jealousy isn't weakness, it's a feeling. What matters is how we handle it with honesty and care. When you recognize these signs with kindness, you create space for real conversation. You can say, "I notice you seem concerned when I mention James. Talk to me about that." Or, "Your questions about my hiking group seem to go deeper than casual interest. What's really on your mind?" The goal isn't to eliminate jealousy, it's to bring it into the light where love can address it. Because here's what I've learned. Jealousy thrives in shadows and assumptions, but it melts in the warmth of honest communication and genuine reassurance. When you recognize these signs with kindness, you create space for honesty and trust, two things every real relationship needs. You show a man that his vulnerabilities are safe with you, and that strength sometimes means admitting when we're scared of losing what matters most. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you, wrote Maya Angelou. And that's especially true in love. Don't let jealousy stay in the shadows. Bring it into the light where healing begins. Do you have a question, a personal insight, or your own story about recognizing these subtle signs? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Your wisdom helps all of us grow. And before you go, like and subscribe so you never miss these conversations about love, connection, and finding joy in life's next chapter. You can also check the video description below. I've added links to more inspiring content about understanding the language of mature love that I think you'll find truly valuable. And I'm Vernon. Thanks for watching my video.